When it comes to public policies, each one is interpreted differently, but depending on that interpretation, can there be consequences? For the Lakino City Police Department, such is their mission statement as presented below. Their ultimate goal through their mission statement is to provide safety and security to their community in which they serve. Not only that, but being a police department, they are also enhanced with by responding to emergency calls, as well as being able to partner with their community. This is one of the missions that most law enforcement agencies have, and in order to do so, they also follow policies that dictate what a law enforcement agency can and cannot do in order to provide the adequate service to the community in order to protect the peace. With the objectives of a law enforcement agency such as the Lakino Police Department, it's that they are to provide emergency response to any call that they are given, depending on the call. But the thing is, not every call that comes into the department is going to be the same. That way, each officer is ready for the unexpected. But the overall thing about an objective that the police department has is that they are tasked with providing safety and security to the public, but not only to the public in which they serve, but also to any visitors to their community. As I mentioned before, each law enforcement agency follows a policy, and those policies dictate their actions. Such are the actions of enforcing laws and the policies in which have been established by either the state or the federal government. The Lakino Police Department also follows these laws and enforces them to the extent in which they are able to provide safety and security to their community. As I also mentioned, it is never a good thing to assume that each call of service that comes in is going to be the same. Therefore, each officer of the police department is tasked within themselves to prepare themselves that going into each call they are given, it will never be the same. That way they are not caught off guard or by the unexpected. With the situational analysis for the Lakino Police Department, it is that depending on their location, whether it be inland of a state or close to the coast, will dictate how the response to the community will become. For example, when the situation of a disaster, such as a natural disaster, occurs, it is the task of the Lakino Police Department in order to accommodate the laws and the enforcement orders that are passed down to them. Such can be an order of evacuation, depending on the extent of the disaster at hand. With such an order of evacuation, the officers are entrusted with the safety and security of their citizens that they serve and protect. That being, they are to help evacuate these members of the public in order to keep them safe. But the thing that does come to mind is what becomes priority. Yes, an evacuation order has been given and the officers are tasked with helping in that evacuation. But what goes on if they see that there are other individuals from the public committing crimes such as looting, robbing, burglary, while in the process of evacuation? Does an officer blindly look away from it in order to keep on with the process of evacuation and ensuring the safety of those that they are helping evacuate? That is one of the many things that could be a loophole within the policy of how disaster response and relief goes about. With the reflection a law enforcement officer has, they have to reflect on what actions they are to take and what duty they have to the community at that point in time. Not just as a law enforcement officer, but also an individual that is there to help them in order to be taken to or transported to a safer location away from the disaster zone. And what I mentioned earlier about how a law enforcement officer would look away at one point just to keep in mind the security of individuals, apart from leaving them behind and going to enforce the laws of someone looting or robbery, that is basically on a balance beam. Actions can be taken, actions possibly shouldn't be taken in order not to compromise the safety of others that are close by. That is just one of the many things of a disaster response relief policy that has been established. If such things considered are not in the right, then a law enforcement officer's duty is basically nulled at one point in not being able to decide what actions should be taken. Yes, the security and safety of the citizens that they're helping evacuate is at hand, but at the same time, can they idly stand by and watch other individuals commit crimes directly in front of them during this evacuation order? It is just something within a disaster response relief policy that is just a little bit too mangled in order to understand. Through the research of how law enforcement is portrayed during a disaster response, basically says they have to be prepared for the unexpected. Not every disaster area that a law enforcement encounters is going to be the same, just like every other call that comes into their department for emergency response is not going to be the same. They should also be entrusted with resources, with equipment, in order to be prepared for the unexpected. An officer may never know that there's going to be flooding in one area or going to be power lines down in the other because of the disaster. It's just going to be an unexpected event in which they cannot control. The training that they go through is simply not enough. They still have to keep in mind the training that they do have is one thing, but at the same time, they have to expect that their training is not going to be sufficient enough for them to convey the duty that they have. With the equipment that they are given and the resources that they are given, it may not even hurt to have an extra source of that. Being over-prepared for such situations such as disasters is not an entirely bad thing. It could actually be beneficial. Whereas one officer may run out of a certain supply and the other officer coming to assist has that exact same supply in bulk and can transfer some over to his fellow companion. But at the same time, the way that actions of duty through a policy of disaster response and relief is dictated can possibly undermine what a law enforcement officer for the city could do. So it is a right thing to keep the policy in mind, but at the same time, it is up to the officer's discretion in how they perceive it and how they enforce it and go about it. Like I mentioned in the previous slide, priority of safety and security is one thing, but doing what is right is another. These two conflict at certain points in time, and it could be a detrimental decision for a law enforcement officer. Within this policy, it is just some sort of discrepancy within it that there's a gray area in which cannot really be interpreted. So what could be done is that by revising a disaster response relief policy, law enforcement officers are able to do what they can and still protect and serve their community. By serving and protecting those citizens that they are helping, and by also enforcing the laws as they see fit, they are still within their scope of call to duty. A law enforcement officer is not just there to arrest people or to patrol streets. They are there for the community. They are there in order to keep them safe and basically help them when needed and when they are called to do so. Disaster relief is not just one thing. Disaster response is not just one thing. They are both the same, and within both of these, a law enforcement officer should be able to complete both tasks of safety and security of the community and the public, but at the same time be able to enforce the laws as they see fit, because if they do not, then the structures that make up the community in which they serve may be damaged, and then members of the community would be asking why. Why are the structures that we live in, that we work in, have been compromised for our sake? These structures are also the community's livelihood. Law enforcement for the community is there to serve and protect. That means not just members of the community or the public, that also means the structures in which make up the community.